Wonderful. Thank you, Jody. And hey, everyone. Wonderful to see you all here today. And yeah, I see one person at least has put their info in the chat. If you'd like to sound off and just tell us who you are and where you're joining us from, that would be wonderful. Be glad to see you all here. As Jody said, I'm Ricky Barton. As a quick introduction here, uh, I have a consulting business. I'm actually based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania now. However, 12 years I spent in Southwest Missouri doing primary prevention work. I've been in the field 16 years total, and 12 of those were down there in Missouri. So I was in the Mid-America PTTC region for a long time, overseeing prevention work in 21 counties of Southwest Missouri. And then started, doing a lot of traveling and training and speaking. And so that's really what I do now. And when Jody and I were originally talking about this idea of credentialing and why we need to make credentialing a priority, why we as prevention specialists should find this important. This just really lit a fire in me because this is something that I'm personally very passionate about, and that is to enhance and professionalize and grow our field to be recognized in a way that other people look to us for answers. We're not, kind of scrounging to get at their table. They're coming to us to find us because they respect what we do. And so I was just super thrilled to be able to offer this to you all today. Our conversation is going to start a little bit about history, like what is the history of the prevention field? And some of that may be new to some of you, and some of you maybe not so much if you've been around for a while and heard from where we come. But we'll start there. And I think it's important that we start there because of then that's where it brings us to today. But we'll get there. I won't get ahead of myself yet. We'll talk about what credentialing really looks like. What does that mean? Is it scary? Is it not? And then the value that credentials bring and why we want to professionalize our field. But now that you all have sort of dropped in the chat some of your information, maybe make sure that you see Jody's most recent chat there with all of those links to different trainings that are coming up. So make sure you grab those beforehand, because what I'm going to ask you to do is, first of all, if you are a person joining this training and you do not hold a prevention credential, so you do not hold a prevention credential, what's the barriers that keep you from pursuing it? And listen, we are a safe space here. No one needs to worry about any judgment coming your way. If you say, I'm lazy, I don't want to, I'm scared, whatever that might be, what are some barriers that keep you from pursuing that credentialing? I just don't know much about it. Newer to the field. Absolutely. That is fair. And in some cases, it may not be something that's promoted or something that is stressed by agencies or by the people that you're working with. And so maybe there is no awareness. Barb's currently in the process of so is Lisa. Fantastic. Okay, so the guidance and the required classes, not knowing a clear path. All right, this is really very, very helpful. 1 year of experience working on it. Great. Yeah, we'll talk about Nebraska. We will get there. Definitely a work in progress there. Let's see. Okay, yep. So continuing to learn. A lot of you are working towards it. That's great. Um, Happy, thank you. But yes, okay. So Kansas also, Kansas and Nebraska, you're both in the same boat there. We will talk to talk to that in just a little bit. Again, the things from this webinar that we're talking through, you can use as talking points for why there needs to be credentials offered into your state. All right, new to the field. Okay, so we've heard from the people who don't have a prevention credential. Let's hear from the people who do. So if you are on this webinar and you do hold a prevention credential, what are some of the benefits you have gained from it? What are some of the perks that you see to having it? And that's interesting. I'm also seeing maybe not sure if the job would entertain it. So that's interesting. An interesting note there. Okay. While we're waiting for a few other responses, I'm just going to scroll through the chat again, make sure I didn't miss anybody's here. Love it. We're going to talk through how to get your credentials. We are going to give you a great path forward for those of you who haven't really been talked to about that or that's been shared with you. Hopefully, you'll walk out of here with some knowledge. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything new dropped in the chat, which makes me wonder if we've got some people on this webinar who, or if we don't have people who do have credentials. Maybe all of you are here because you have an interest, and maybe that's something that you want to pursue. And so I will just say from my own personal experience, when I first entered this field back in 2009, I had the option of pursuing that credential. It was presented to me. Actually, I was working in Louisiana at that time, and they just have one credential, and it was the ICNRC exam. And at that time, I was what was I, about 3 years out of college at that point, and so I still was very academic minded. I still was very like study, focused and things like that. And so studying for the exam back then, while it was an undertaking, it came more naturally to me. But I've heard a lot of people say that the exam is one of the biggest barriers that they face in wanting to pursue certification. What I will say is the exam is vastly improved since I took it back in 2009. And so hopefully that can bring you a little bit of hope as well, but we'll get more into that in just a little bit. So let's move into the history of talking through the prevention field. To be fully honest with you all, we are a baby field. We've not been around that long. The prevention field has not existed for more than just a couple decades at this point. I mean, it's true, and we'll go through a timeline where you'll see kind of the building of it. But when you think about things like medicine and law and government, those have been around for eons. And we are only a few decades old. And we are still learning. There's still a lot of research going into our field, a lot of studying, a lot of experimenting with programs and policies and practices. So we are still learning. And as I said here on the slide, we're constantly updating language, changing approaches. We're evaluating so that we can inform our field on what works and what doesn't. And as you think through the field, while this wasn't really a big piece of the history I'm about to walk you through, you'll remember that back in the mid 1900s, it was very much scare tactics. We got to scare people into this. If you think about like Reefer Madness and that the film that was released back then, and just like very scary, and the pictures of people who may have had consequences, horrific consequences from substance use. We came from that, and then we realized, scare tactics really don't work. And so that's where we started to evolve and to change, looking at subpopulations, thinking about social norming. Instead of saying, hey, 15% of youth are vaping, we're saying, hey, 85% are not. You're in the majority if you aren't vaping. And the power of that message versus the 15% that might normalize use. So we are constantly moving. We are constantly growing in our field, which is exciting. And that's to be said about medicine as well, and law and things along those lines. But to say that we're equals in those kinds of fields. I want to walk you through just a few slides where I put together a bit of a timeline that will give us some idea of where we've been and how far we've come. So back all the way back in 1826, so 200 years ago, we were really just starting to see the first temperance society formed, meaning temperance, essentially, that was back in the movement of trying to reduce alcohol consumption. Back then it didn't look anything like it did today. It was a lot of moonshine and things along those lines, and wine and whiskeys and liquors. But the 1920 is when our 18th Amendment passed, which was the prohibition. And so that piece of history very much marked as that's when we had a lot of bootlegging happening, a lot of speakeasies that were coming out, a lot of, law being broken because alcohol was illegal at that time. 13 years pass and that was repealed. And so that 21st Amendment said, okay, prohibition's now been repealed. Then we see just 2 years after that, Alcoholics Anonymous was founded. So I don't know if you knew this, but I didn't until I got into the history of it, that Alcoholics Anonymous is almost 100 years old. It's 90 years old, this year. And so that's actually pretty amazing to me that it's been around for that long of a period of time. And then I know that my timeline now has a big gap. We're jumping from 1935 to 1971. A lot did happen in between those two dots. But again, I'm just trying to sort of pepper in the key things that I think are important for us to know about our history. So 1971, President Nixon declared the war on drugs, which brought substance use really to the forefront for people to realize there's something that's happening that's a problem here. Throughout the 60s, we understand that drug use became more commonplace, more public, more talked about, to the point then where 1971, we declared a war on drugs. A couple of years later, the DEA, or the Drug Enforcement Agency, was founded. And then just a few years after that, Monitoring the Future survey started. So if you are a state that participates in that Monitoring the Future study, it actually goes far back then, where they started with just a couple grades. It's then since been expanded to more grades. But that has been around for a very long time. That's one of those longitudinal surveys that has tracked youth substance use over time in all of our states. 1981, and we're starting to get into the years where people maybe were alive when these things were happening, but the Just Say No campaign was started. It was kind of it started then, released a few years later. We started to see different messaging around it, but you'll notice here 1981 stands out as a pretty significant year. We've got three markers on this slide. Because also in 1981, we had the block grants that were established, and that under a different name at that time, but they are what really fund a lot of prevention work across states all over the United States. And so this was a pretty significant moment as well. And then ICNRC was founded in 1981. This is going to be significant because we are going to talk about ICNRC at length today. We're going to talk about where that is because they're the holders of the International Prevention Credential. That's the test I mentioned earlier. That's kind of the known credential globally. So we'll get there in just a little bit, but just a note there that dates back to 1981. A couple more slides on history here. So then just a few years later, we had really what most people can agree is the starting point of when community-based prevention happened. So before then, we're doing media campaigns, the Just Say No, the war on drugs, the interdiction efforts. But it's like then we started to realize that there's some prevention concepts that we can start changing communities to be healthier and safer and help to mitigate some of these risk factors. We start to see in 1984, some of the states start prevention professional associations. So this is when our career really starts to take off. So when I say we're only a couple decades old, this is why I say that. Because while things were happening before then, the early 1980s, or the 40 to 45 years ago, is really when our field started to say, hey, there are professionals in this field who are doing this work. 1985 is when the research around risk and protective factors really started for this. Hawkins and Catalano and Glantz and Pickens, they both started their work around the same time and released their reports in the early 90s. But they, picked up from the Framingham Heart Study. They took off with the idea of risk and protective factors and said, there might be risk and protective factors related to youth substance use. Let's research this. And so that's where that started, was the mid 1980s. CSAP, founded in 1986. Also in 1986 is where we had our very first prevention field code of ethics dropped by the National Association of Prevention Professionals and Advocates. And that group is now no longer, but that's essentially the very first iteration of ethics around the prevention field. And again, I'm going to connect this back to other professions that we know. We know that the medical field follows a code of ethics. We know that the legal field follows a code of ethics. And so I'm comparing this because I am, proposing to you all today that we are on the same level as those types of professions. We have the same credibility. We have the same degree of knowledge about the things that we're experts in as those individuals have. And so that code of ethics was a really significant moment for us, that the work that we're doing is very important and matters. Connected to that, we're continuing through history. As you see, like things are happening in the 80s. Things are really taking off for us. The very first Certified Prevention Specialist credential launched in South Carolina in 1987, and then just 2 years later was Pennsylvania, my home state. So very first state credential for the prevention field. The ONDCP, Office of National Drug Control Policy, was founded by that Anti-Drug Abuse Act in 1988. So ONDCP, which we know does a great amount of work and grants, and a lot of people are funded through ONDCP and that oversight there. SAMHSA was founded. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services branch of the government was founded, along with, again, those block grants that provide that block funding. That's that connection there where suddenly we were marked with 20% of that block grant for prevention. And that's what has continued today. We got word earlier, last month or so, that that's going to be continued at the 20% level. We were looking at potential cuts, but we can celebrate that that's going to be kept at 20%. So that's been around since 1992. And coming back to ICNRC, 1994 is when we had our very first national certified prevention specialist. So other states have been working on this. I mentioned South Carolina, Pennsylvania. Other states have been coming along with that since 1987, but then we have its national credential offered to us. Then the Drug Free Communities Support Act released funding in 1997 and has existed since then, where we've got our DFC grants across the nation. And then it's our final one for our history lesson here, SAPS curriculum. I mentioned SAMHSA, they started in 1997, and then they've been a part of releasing different curricula like the SAPS, which has gone through multiple updates ever since. Used to be substance abuse prevention skills training. Now it is the SPIF application for prevention success training. And they've also, SAMHSA also holds the new updated ethics course for prevention professionals, as well as the newer prevention core competencies training that's offered. So SAP started in 1999 and then has had all of these iterations in the last 26 years. The Strategic Prevention Framework came out in 2004. And of course, that is what many of us do our prevention work on across the communities that we work within. We've got our IC and RC Code of Ethics in 2011. And then I just mentioned those prevention core competencies are published. So all of that, you're like, Ricky, that was a whole lot of history. I share that because those are markers of importance. Those are markers that show us that we have developed and evolved as a field to the point where professionalization has happened. We have put in the work as a field to grow, to develop, to learn. So as we get into this and as we get into the credentialing kind of 101 idea, there are a lot of professions that we trust. You trust your doctor, we trust licensed counselors, coaches, trainers. We trust them for that guidance. My question is, and you can drop in the chat, why does it matter that those people are credentialed? Why does it matter to us that doctors went through school and had to go through residency? Why does it matter to us that lawyers know law? Why does it matter to us that licensed counselors learn counseling practices? Drop in the chat some reasons why that matters. Okay, let's see. I'm seeing it all pepper in right away. Okay. Best practices to avoid harm, trust and safety. Taken seriously and credible to the public. Yep. Don't just want anyone practicing important skills. Some of them are literally life-saving. Absolutely, Abby. We want to know that they're experts in their field, that they've been trained properly, proof that they went to training. Yep. So absolutely. All of those things help to build our trust. They help us to know that that's someone that knows what they're talking about. That's why we also have specialist doctors. We've got doctors that practice general medicine, but oftentimes if there's a major issue that pops up, they send us to a specialist for that because that specialist has gone to extra training for that specific thing. In the same way, we want to make sure that we are the trained professionals, that we're delivering the right prevention curriculum for our communities to do as little harm as possible. And so again, to echo everything that you all said in the chat, it tells us they were trained. They've got the knowledge. There's a standard or a baseline of what we expect of these people so that we can trust that. And I think that baseline is a really key point. If all of us could just say that we're credentialed prevention specialists, but we've been through no generalized training or expectations put on us, we can't really, as a field, say that we all share the same knowledge. In the same way that a doctor has to go through a very specific path of medical school to learn the things that they're learning. And so we want to make sure our field has that credibility as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about some value behind that and what exists. And so one of the things that I very much stress whenever I talk about our field, we're a scientific field. Sometimes people they hear what I do and they're like, oh, so you go into school a lot. I'm like, actually, no, I work with communities. I work with community agencies. I work with law enforcement. I work with the government. I work with school districts. I might be in the school once or twice, but I am mostly working with communities on a very scientific framework that's proven to make change happen in a community. And we need to not forget that. We're not just doing touchy-feely work. We're really doing things that we know has documented evidence behind it that is effective, which is, again, speaks to why we need to be doing this, because we need to be doing it well so that we have the effect that we want to have and we continue to bolster our field. So we've got these frameworks, we've got strategies that we know work, we have activities that have been documented, the curriculum and the programs and the practices. We know we're changing communities And so when we go through trainings about the strategic prevention framework, the 7 strategies for community change, prevention core competencies, risk and protective factors, the list goes on and on and on. We are actually helping to build our field. We're helping to show our field makes that difference because we are now trained and able to do these things. So before we get too much farther into the why, I want to talk about the credentials because at this point you're like, okay, Ricky, we get it. There's some value to it. We understand. So what exists? And I already mentioned the IC and RC. The simple answer to what credentialing exists is it depends. It depends on where you are. And we're going to look at a map in a little bit that will show you what your state's specific credential options are. But it does vary by state. There is no standard across the United States for this prevention credential other than the IC and RCs. So IC and RC, the International Consortium, no, the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium. It's a lot of really big $10 words. That's what IC and RC. It is known as a global credential because it is International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium. So, as I already told you in the history, it started in the early 1980s, and it really has developed those standards and expectations for credentials across the continuum of care. So, if you're not familiar with that, that's a different training for a different day. But you've got your prevention part of that continuum, you've got the treatment part, and the recovery part. So, they hold credentials and actually exams for each of those pieces of the continuation of the continuum of care. And as it says here, they represent actually 75 different certifications and licensing boards across those 50 states and territories. We've got 3 Native American regions and across branches of the US military and 11 international regions. So you can go on your website, you can check it out. If you're looking at moving overseas, you can go and see where your IC and RC credential could be, transferred to. But the point being, we've got 50 credentialing boards that recognize and have a prevention specialist credential, our field, and there's about 50,000 people who are represented by that credential. So this is a really big cadre of prevention professionals that exist with this certification. And my sell to you today is that I hope that you become one. And it sounds like many of you are working towards that from what I see in the chat because this is sort of the level of credential that proves that we've got what it takes to do prevention work in our community. And I'm not saying that if you don't have this credential, you can't do the work or you won't do it well. We're going to get to why it's matters and why it's worth the investment, but it really comes down to we are proving to the world that we've got a field worth investing in. Now, what I said I'm going to show you the states in just a little bit. 50 states do have a prevention credential. I should say 50 states and territories because I know there's some states that are still working on theirs. But many of them actually have tiers, and we'll look at that where you could start at like an entry level, and then maybe there's the IC and RC level, and then maybe an advanced one. And we'll get more into that there. But I just want to start with this. And then I pulled these 2 quotes directly from the IC and RC website because I think that they were so powerful in what they said. IC and RC promotes public protection by offering these internationally recognized credentials and examinations for prevention, substance use disorder, and recovery preventions. We're looking at public protection. And many of you commented on that in the chat, that some of this work that we're doing is life-saving, that we want to make sure that we are doing safe best practices to avoid harm, that we've got trust and safety as our forefront. That's this public protection. That by becoming a credentialed prevention specialist, we're actually building trust in the communities about the work we do and protecting the public. The second quote I have here that came from their website, that all IC and RC examinations are based on the latest research, evidence-based practices, and are updated regularly. That's important too. Like I said earlier, we are not a stagnant field. We are a field that is constantly moving and evolving and researching and evaluating. So the IC and RC keeps up with that. So they're constantly looking at how to adapt to the new things that are evolving in our field. So, their examinations are valid, reliable, legally defensible, which is another important point for us all in the event that we've got any issues that pop up in our community, legally defensible, and psychometrically sound. So that's all just to say that ICNRC and what they offer to us as prevention professionals is huge for us and as professionals in terms of like the safety that offers us, the legal defensibility, and the fact that we can stand behind it and say that what we do works. The reciprocity piece, another $10 word, but essentially just that you can transfer those. So I told you I started my work in Louisiana. I then transferred or had reciprocity up to Missouri and came into Missouri's credentialing level at the highest level because I already had my IC&RC. So I came in there. And then now that I live in Pennsylvania, I was able to use reciprocity and have that recognized here in Pennsylvania. So I have moved through 3 different states. There's also different countries that you're able to have reciprocity with that credential. So that's huge. You don't have to start from scratch. You're able to move that. Um, and again, just to sort of continue to drive this point home, you're part of a group of prevention professionals across the world, and that you all can get support from, you can advocate with. It does just give you a really great platform of people. So let's continue this idea of why we want this credentialing. We already mentioned the credibility. By going through training, by allowing ourselves to learn, and many of you said you're studying a lot for the CPS exam and all of that. I love that because that adds to the credibility of our field that you all know what to do in a community. You know how to use the strategic prevention framework. You know those domains. You know how to operate within them. And so that connects to that competency that you know enough to be able to do this work effectively with minimal to no harm. Credentialing also can offer you career opportunities. So I actually, whenever I was hired for the job that I took in Missouri, and I moved from Louisiana to Missouri, that I was actually the very first person. That agency had held the block grant, a piece of that federal block grant for 20 years. I was the very first person they had hired who came in with a prevention credential already. Typically, they were hiring people who had no knowledge of the prevention field at all. And as I took over a director role there, I had that same experience. I was hiring people who were brand new to the field. Well, if you hold this credential, your career opportunities could explode. If you have grants that come into your area, you've got opportunities for you to apply for jobs in different places, and you're taking that credential with you, that can really open some doors and help with that. Now, the professional development piece also connects here because one of the things that I'm very passionate about is retention in our field. And higher wages and professional development, I think, very much contribute to retention. If we train people well, if we give them this opportunity for credentialing and we can offer higher wages, because of credentialing, then we've got a higher chance that we're going to be able to retain people in our field. So it's not just a stepping stone. It's not just an entry level position. Rather, it's something that they've been in. I've told you I've been in it for 16 years. This is something that I'm now in it for life. I ain't leaving. But some people come in, they earn for a year or two, they might earn some low level credential and then they kind of move on. But if we can continue this process, I think that speaks a lot to retention. We also can think about when it comes to having a credential, there's a higher degree of respect that comes from that, from other fields, from people in our field. So the point I want to make here is that credentialing really helps to professionalize our field. It helps to put us on the same stage as other professions, and a few other thoughts here that I'll just, cover as we talk, and then we'll get into talking about specific states. By being a credentialed prevention specialist, we gain the public trust because we know what we're doing works, and then we can provide that really great work through our credentialed professionals. We're giving our communities the best that we can. Hopefully that will help us secure more funding. We all know that there was a lot of funding question marks this year. Having a group of individuals who are prevention professionals, they're certified in the field, rising and speaking about funding and the importance of doing these research-backed strategies, that's huge for our field. I already mentioned that retention piece, that it hopefully helps in retaining the staff that we've got in our prevention agencies, but also the people we've got in the field as a whole, across our nation and the world. And as more of us are credentialed, that adds to the knowledge of the field because you're bringing in people who have different levels of experience, expertise, questions, things that really help to bolster the things that we're doing in our field. So, if I haven't made the point already, I'm a big fan and advocate for being credentialed because these things just help to support our field and make us professionalized. Like I said, put us on that same level. So let's talk about the states idea here. Many states have a tiered system of credentialing. What I mean by that is they might have an entry level that requires you to maybe have a couple hours of ethics, maybe go through the SAMHSA's SAPS training, and then you're kind of maybe a couple hours of work and you're able to get that credential, that first level of a credential. Then there might be the IC and RC level where you take the exam and you become, this nationally certified prevention professional. And then some states offer a more advanced one. So after you've put in maybe 6,000 hours or 10,000 hours in the field and you have your IC and RC, then you might be able to say that you're an advanced prevention credential. So again, we'll look at a map in a little bit and get you a link where you'll be able to share and research your own states and all of that. But I just want to make comment while we're here that, in my opinion, I think that there's pros and cons to a tiered approach. And let me just say that Missouri has a tiered approach. So I came from that and then moved to Pennsylvania where they just have one credential. So from kind of thinking through all of this, I would say some of the pros of a tiered approach is that you're acknowledging the level of skills that people are maybe coming into our field with. And you're not wanting to create too big of a hurdle for them to jump over to feel like they are already a professional in our field. So I think that it does help with retention when you can have an entry level credential. It also gives a sense of upward mobility to individuals. If I'm starting here, but I know then I go here and then I know I go here. And I think there's something to say about achievement and hopefully with that maybe comes some increased wages and some benefit to that following that process and that path. And it does create that soft entry into the field. Cons that I would say to having a tiered approach is what I have seen in my work over the last 16 years and just knowing a lot and meeting a lot of people. When there's an entry level, oftentimes preventionists stay at that entry level. Whether that's because of fear of the exam or fear of, not you're not going to get a pay increase. So why would I get this credential? Because it's not going to change my job. It's not going to change, how much I'm getting paid. I would say the con there is that people stay there. And it might be advanced prevention credential beyond the ICNRC might seem a little bit redundant. I found even though I was the highest level in Missouri, I oftentimes just said I was ICNRC certified because that's kind of what maybe people care the most about in terms of that reputation. So maybe without that incentive, why would I achieve more and fight for more? So I think that there's pros and cons to this tiered approach. But I would just say that I think any certification is better than no certification. And I would also say that it is the ICNRC requirements are not out of reach. And so let's look at those together real quick, just so we can kind of all understand that together. So I stole this exactly from their website. This is what ICNRC's requirements are. You need 2,000 hours of prevention experience, and there's domains, and they explain that on the website. So you can go and check those out and get some more information there. But you have to have a minimum of 10 hours in each of the domains. So you need 120 hours total, and there has to be at least 10 in each. And as it says there, 24 of those have to be alcohol, tobacco, and drug specific with 6 hours of prevention ethics. Then you have to be supervised by a person who can supervise for this degree. And there's people out there who offer that. And so they supervise those hours to make sure that you've completed those 120 within those domains. Once you get through that, then you take that exam. And if you pass that exam, then you sign that code of ethics and you have that certification there for you. And then 40 hours every 2 years, you've got to submit 40 hours of continuing education, whether you're going to conferences or trainings or webinars that offer those. You've got to submit those every 2 years. And as it says there, you have to live or work at least 51% of the time in that member's jurisdiction. So for example, that's why I transferred mine to Pennsylvania. I could have held Missouri, but I don't live there anymore. And so Pennsylvania was the one that made the most sense for me. All right, so that's their requirements. It's really like, I don't want to minimize it. The exam definitely takes work to study for, but it's worth doing because it helps you to get that experience and that knowledge in the field that will really help to solidify all of the things that I talked about before. Now, I told you I would give you a map, and I'm actually going to go ahead and switch my share here so that we can actually look at the true website together. Let me just make that adjustment real quick here on my slides. And Megan, if you could drop in the chat the link to this website so that people can look either along with me or later. But this is so the PTTC network has a map that shows you your prevention, your credentials that are in your state. So again, I'm most familiar with Missouri, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Missouri. So you click there and you say view requirements. It then brings up all of the options that are there in Missouri. And again, I'm most familiar with this. So what I can tell you is it starts with the middle level, which is the IC&RC exam level. So what that requires is if you have a high school diploma, 4,000 hours in the field. If you have a bachelor's degree or higher, 2,000 hours in the last 10 years. You do have to do those 120 hours that I mentioned earlier. And I'm sorry, I can zoom in if we need to look. I'm realizing it's probably rather small on your screen. There we go. So 120 hours of those supervision with those minimum requirements. We just looked at those. In addition, you've got to take the SAPS course. You've got to, your degree has to be from somewhere in the US Department's database for those things. And then there's your ethics requirement. Here's your 24 hours of ATOD training and 20 hours obtained in 12 months prior to applying. So you can't have worked in the field 6 years ago, come back to the field and immediately apply for this. Then you have to pass the exam, and then that's it. Now we cross a little bit of an invisible line right here. Now we're looking at pre-IC and RC certification level. So like I said, Missouri is one of these tiered states. So they have a Missouri prevention specialist. The only things that credential requires is either a high school diploma, a high school diploma or a GED, taking the SAPS course, and 3 hours of prevention ethics. So no hours in the field required, nothing like that. So that's a very low bar entry into a prevention specialist certification in Missouri. Then there's an advanced title in Missouri as well, the Missouri Advanced Certified Substance Abuse Prevention Professional. That one requires that you hold that middle one, which they call Certified Reciprocal Prevention Specialist. So you've got your IC and RC. Then you've also got to have at least 10,000 hours if you're a high school diploma, 8,000 hours if you're bachelor's, 6,000 if you're master's. Hours in the field. And then you've got it, yeah, and that's it. And then you just got to keep up with that credentialing. So you can see here that the Missouri's got that tiered approach. I'm going to switch over and just go back to the map here, making sure that I'm tracking with you all. As we talked about earlier, Nebraska, if you clicked on that already, you're not on our call, they do not currently have these credentials. And Jody, if you want to say more about that, Kansas, you're the same boat. You can for sure come off mute unless you want to just chime in later. Go ahead.
Sure, just really quick. So we are actually working with Nebraska to try to help them to figure out some things for credentialing. So stay tuned to that. Kansas has worked in the past with Oklahoma, and I know that they are still working on that too. So it's important that you're on here and make sure that you have your voice heard. So reach out to your state contacts and let them know that you're really looking for the credentialing. So, and I'll turn it back to Ricky.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yep. So that, what our Mid-America PTTC, they cover the 4 states of Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa. So we can look at Iowa together. If you're joining us from a different state, use this map to see what your credential requirements are. And then, of course, connect with your local regional PTTC to get any more information or training that you need. But I've also got several resources I'm going to share with you all at the very end to help you in this process. But let's just look at Iowa really briefly here. So Iowa's requirements, 2,000 clock hours of supervised experience in these domains. You've got to fill out this document, this resume document. There's the 120 hours that are required by IC and RC. And then just hours are documented here on this form. So a little bit different, but again, it's just really kind of like the logistics, slightly different from Missouri. Not too much though. So here's some of the requirements of those training hours broken down, and then your degree requirement. And then, as usual, Iowa, it's got a tiered level approach. They've got the advanced tier. That's right. I'm sorry. Yep, they've got an advanced one beyond that. So their entry level is IC and RC, right, Jody? Just yeah, okay, that's what I thought. So then they've got an advanced one, which is the 6,000 hours in the field after you've had your IC and RC. Like this includes that. Here's some of the required clock hours that you've got to have documented. You describe kind of your all of the answers to these questions to help kind of give them an idea of who you are, your work that you've done. You've got to have 3 letters of recommendation. And of course, you've got to pass this exam, and then you're the advanced certified prevention specialist in Iowa. So, all of this to say, there's a lot of things that are happening, and I've noticed that Jody said that there's things that are provided by the Iowa Board of Certification. I also happen to know Missouri is currently actively looking at their certifications as well and sort of making some changes and shifts there too. So just be aware that this website is updated by the PTTCs as often as they know that new things are happening and emerging. But the truth is, the best place to go to is to find your state's credentialing board, which was at the bottom of each of those states' websites. Once you click on your state at the very bottom, there's usually a link of who that credentialing board is, and go directly to them to make sure that there's no updates or changes that this website hasn't seen yet. So again, just resources for you all to know. I know several of you in the chat already said you're working on yours, so you probably know your states. But if you were one of the people that said, hey, I'm brand new to the field, or I'm just in my first year, I'm trying to figure it all out, this is a really great place for you to start to say, hey, I need to start documenting some hours in these sections, in these domains. And I really think that that will be helpful for you all in moving forward. Okay, so if I were to try to wrap this up with a pretty bow, I would say to you, because we're gonna have some time for questions at the end, I'm gonna share some resources, but I would just say to you, I'll stop short of begging, but I will very much stress to you that having prevention credentials does add credibility to our field. It professionalizes our field. You are doing all of us in the field a solid by pursuing your own credentialing because it helps to add that credibility and professionalization to our field. So, my encouragement to you is to invest in yourself as a professional and then also invest in our field by seeking credentials if you haven't already, because it really does add to the body of research that's out there, to the group of people who are doing this work, and it helps to bolster our field and get us recognized as one. We're in the process of becoming that. People are starting to understand. There's universities who have prevention science degrees now. There are universities that have doctoral programs around prevention science. There's only a couple, there's a handful of them, but we're emerging. And so that to me also says, hey, people are starting to notice our field as something of importance. So let's be part of that movement. Let's be part of the movement that is generating more professionals into our field that stick around and see the value in it. All right, Megan's going to help me out by sharing some resources in the chat, and I'm sure, we can also get these in an email to you as well. So the first thing that's there is the IC and RC Prevention Candidate Guide. So I've got that like little white box there. And that essentially helps you through those domains that are required, as well as offer a sample exam. Yes, I said it, a sample exam to help you know what kind of questions are asked and how to sort of study around that. So that's there for you. ICNRC has that on their website. And of course, Megan's going to put that link in the chat. Nicole Augustine has a study guide. That's the other image that you see here and the link there that you could order on Amazon. It will help you study for that. Mitchell Moore and his Prevention Training Services group has a prep course for the prevention exam. Mitchell Moore is on the ICNRC board, and so he offers prep courses. I want to say there's one coming up in October. If you have not heard about that, either use the link or which I know is right there in the, oh yeah, so that's in the link that I added, I gave to Megan. October 17th is that next prep course there with prevention training services. So that is an option for you. And listen, if you're even thinking like far down the road you would do this, I would encourage you to take that course because at least will help you know what you need to start doing. So encouragement there. We already shared that PTTC map of what the credentials are for your state, but make sure that you've got that as a resource. And there's also the Southwest PTTC offered a three-part series on preparing for the exam. So you also can go and watch those recorded webinars and studies, help you study specifically for them. So I hope those resources are of benefit to you as you all are thinking about this. The other thing that I wanted to encourage was this. We're talking a lot about professionalizing our field and wanting to make sure that people know that what we do matters. I'm working with Nicole Augustine to offer a virtual training of trainers. So we mentioned earlier SAMHSA's Prevention Core Competencies, which is a 2.5 day training that's offered in communities across the US to help community members and prevention professionals learn more about our field. So we're offering an opportunity for you to be trained to offer that in your field. Thanks, Abby. It's a great training. I love that. Thank you. So if you are interested in that, I think that I can grab the link here. I don't think I sent that to Megan, so let me grab that. I've got a page here where you can go and learn more information about that core competencies. Jody, I know in the Mid-America PTTC, Jody is trained to offer prevention core competencies, and she and her team are working on offering that training in the region in the coming year. But this is an opportunity for you all to become trainers in it. So, this is always a confusing thing to talk about. You can go to the training and learn, but you also can be trained to offer that in your community. So this slide is all about the latter. So starting in October 20th, 27th, November 3rd, and November 10th, from 2 to 4, we're offering that opportunity for you all to go through that training. So if that's of interest to you, please go to that website. You can always email me. I'll put my my contact info on this next slide. So if you do want to reach out about any of that, you can, and I'd be happy to help. But again, it's just to say, hey, if we're going to keep professionalizing our field, we got to train people to know what prevention is, to know what good prevention is, and to make a big difference.